Hi, everyone. I'm Avery Willis Hoffman, Program Director at the Park Avenue Armory. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining you all from Brewster, New York, the occupied and unceded homeland of the Wappingers, the Munsee-speaking Delawares. I am a mixed race woman with a brownish golden short curly hair, wearing a black and white top with flowers, sitting in front of a white wall next to a window. Thank you, Josie, for that beautiful welcome song entitled Deep Snow. All of our conversations will be framed by our acknowledgement of the native stewards of the lands on which we presently live. We pay respect to all of their ancestors, as well as the present and future generations. We acknowledge that many Indigenous people continue to live and work on these lands, and we honor their ongoing contributions to our world. So on behalf of Park Avenue Armory and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I'm so pleased to welcome you all to our 100 Years, 100 Women conversation series. This is the second episode in our series and is meant to be a casual lunchtime, at least on the East Coast, gathering of artists and participants to discuss pressing topics and issues as part of our ongoing response to the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which, as many of you know, granted some, but not all women the right to vote. So please feel free to grab a beverage or food and participate in the YouTube chat. Post your questions there throughout the conversation. Thank you so much to Candace and Gloria for the ASL interpretation. So I'm going to turn it over now to Shirine, our host for today, from our partner, National Sawdust, for a few words of welcome and then on to the conversation. Shirine.
Thank you so much, Avery, for this beautiful introduction. Thank you for having us. I'm Shirine Saad, Interim Programming Director at National Sawdust. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm joining you from Brooklyn, New York, occupied and unceded territory of the Lenape people, the original caretakers of the land, as well as the Canarsie and Munsee who have stewarded this land for generations. I'm a Lebanese woman with brownish golden short curly hair, and I'm wearing a blue dress designed by a Palestinian designer. Today, my guests are Diana Elizabeth Jordan, Sade Lythcott, and Sahar Ullah. I'd like for them to introduce themselves, please.
Hi, my name is Sahar Ullah, and my titles these days are Dr. and Professor Ullah. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you from South Florida, the homeland of the Miccosukee, the Seminole, the Tequesta, and the Taino people. I'm a brown-skinned Bangladeshi American woman with black eyebrows and red lipstick, and I'm wearing a light blue headscarf and a black shirt, and I'm sitting in my parents' bedroom with the window behind me.
Hi, I'm Sade Lythcott. I'm the CEO of the National Black Theater. I also chair coalitions of theaters of color. I'm coming to you live and direct from Harlem, which is the traditional homeland of the Munsee Lenape people. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an African-American woman, medium tone with a red lip, hair pulled back in a bun with some hair curly cascading to the side. I'm wearing large hoops, a tan jumpsuit, sitting in front of a beaded Yoruba painting. I'm so happy to join you all today.
Diana Elizabeth Jordan, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. It's a little bit earlier here. I'm coming from the unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tomba nations. I am a black woman. I have twists. I have medium brown skin tone. I am sitting in my apartment here in LA, which has a blurry background so you don't see how messy it is. And I got it. I made it, and it didn't get time to clean before I made it this morning. I have a blue dress on with white flowers and a shell necklace, and I'm sitting and so thrilled to be here with these amazing artists tonight. I can't wait to dig into our dialogue today.
Yes, we're so thrilled to be together here today. So first of all, I'd like to frame the conversation with this idea of sisterhood, to celebrate sisterhood, but also to expand the definition of what a woman means, right? Because we use that word, but I'd like to maybe expand it to the idea of, you know, to be intersectional, and to expand it to women identifying people's work, non-binary people, anybody in the LGBTQ community who feels kinship with feminism and our cause, and also, you know, other people who have suffered from oppression throughout history, so that we're dismantling and disrupting not only patriarchy, but also white supremacy, capitalism, colonialism, classism, all the isms, the penal system, and homophobia, and so many more oppressive systems. So my first question to you all is, how do we liberate ourselves from violent hegemonic structures and decolonize our minds?
I'll start. Oh, Diana, did you want to go?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
I'll start quickly by just saying I think the decolonization of the mind is where we start. My mother, Dr. Barbara Antier, who founded National Black Theater, we used to have these chants in the 70s where and there was this one classic NBT chant that said, we can't see it if we can't first be it. And I think that that's where it starts, that nothing can happen to you unless it happens through you. So I think that, you know, directing so much of our energies, starting at the root, which is ourselves, right? Angela Davis talks brilliantly about the genesis of the word radical, meaning to start at the root. So if we are going to see radical change, if we are going to dismantle all of the isms, it is not an outside conversation, it's an inside conversation and begins first. And that in and of itself is a whole panel around what it is to start to kind of chip away at the spaces in the most honest and vulnerable places to create accountability within ourselves, our practice, our art, how we speak. And then in that kind of journey of decolonizing our own assumptions, language, selves, mind, education, then we can begin to journey outward. Because I think that the thing that we also have to be aware of in this conversation is that fast action can be a form of violence, right? So like we want to make sure that in our best intentions, we're not causing more violence by the haste in which we're reacting, as opposed to just really responding. And that response starts with our conversations with ourselves.
I'm going to piggyback on that. I also think it's important that we recognize and acknowledge how systemic all these isms are, and that we're all, I mean, ableism, racism, homophobia, none of us are 400 years old. I may be closer than some of you, but none of us are 400 years old. So we've all breathed in the systemic racism, ableism, it's all affected us. And so we need to start with that and acknowledge we've been impacted by it. I think as artists, we have a wonderful platform to start to break down those barriers, but we have to acknowledge that it exists and also create safe spaces to have uncomfortable conversations where we acknowledge, oh, I do think that, or I did think that, but how can I take action toward changing those things I need to change? But if we don't acknowledge that it really exists, and even within quote unquote woke artists, which we all are, we still have those isms that we have been impacted by, as what you do with how it impacts you. You know, if I say, I love that we're having sign language interpretation, that we're doing audio description, because that creates more inclusion, especially for people and participants who are in deaf or the disabled community. But we need to acknowledge how systemic our isms are, and then create safe places for uncomfortable conversations to listen and share, so we can decide what actions we need to take to dismantle, and realize it's not going to happen overnight. It wasn't built overnight, and it's not going to be dismantled overnight either.
I think I'll just come in then and coming in wanting to affirm what Sade and Diana just said about this two-part process of liberation. I mean, there's the part of dismantling, which will lead to liberation, which we aspire to lead to liberation. But, you know, both of them are so important, right? The acknowledgement of the structural violence and oppression of all the isms, but also our own personal and our own individual process of decolonizing the mind. Both of them are so important. And I think sometimes as artists, if we're very conscious of the structural oppression that we're engaging with, it can be really demoralizing, right? Because then we ask ourselves, like, what can we do as an individual? What can we do on a personal level? So I think both of those positions are really important. And I think I just wanted to add that, you know, it's a process, right? Like to dismantle anything or to try to work towards liberation. It's not a state, but it's a constant process. Liberation is a process. And, you know, I think for all of us in the space that we occupy, it becomes very, very clear that working for power is not the same thing as working for liberation. And I think like that, to keep that clarity in mind as we do the work and as we engage in our work is also really important.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I really feel that power is the source of corruption, you know, and sometimes it does pollute our spaces as well. And when we're talking about creating safe spaces, but then there are these dynamics of power or power struggles, then we're basically reproducing these toxic energies, right, that have harmed us in the first place. So I'm wondering if you've been, I'm sure you've been thinking about strategies to sort of, replace power with something that's equally sort of, empowering, but much safer, you know, and much sort of rooted in community and love and care and empathy and all that.
I mean, I can jump in, and I think to go to the personal level, right? Like if I don't feel safe in a space, I tell myself I'm okay now by extricating myself from that space, that I don't have to constantly push against and work against a particular structure or system. I can also remove myself. So that's a strategy I've developed for myself as a strategy of self-care. And I know that's not a strategy for everyone, but I find being able to say no is just as empowering as being able to say yes. And sometimes even more so, right? I think especially for a lot of women of color, we say yes to so much labor and so much work and so much unpaid work that I am learning, right, in my process to say no. So I would offer that as one strategy.
I would say that, just to dovetail off of what Sahar says, the thing that I think we have to be careful about is the use of the word safe space, because as you said, what's safe for one person, and we see this every day played out in the news, particularly right now, what's safe for one person is not safe for another. And there's a lot of assumptions built in to that safe space being a destination where everyone has a seat at the table. So I like to, as a strategy, complicate the notion of safe space by injecting care, to your point, Shirine, into the conversation. It's not enough to be creating safe space because of the assumptions that come with that, but that it can this space aspire to both safety and care? Because as we dismantle systemic systems and really look at power structures, what is going to lead us in the direction of our own liberation? Again, with liberation being different for different folks and a journey. There's lots of stuff to liberate in ourselves. And so the process continues, is can we do it in a safe and caring way? If the person that is meeting me on my journey, I am meeting them with care, because I think built in to the processes of dismantling power, we have to inject healing, right? Because you can't reckon with all of what we have endured for generations, for lifetimes, without having complex, comprehensive conversation around healing, right? Because whatever you're destroying leaves a void. And it also, we have to recognize the trauma, the generational trauma, the systemic cellular level trauma in our quest for liberation. So is there care present? Is there healing baked into the rituals, the strategic rituals by which we seek liberation? So my strategy is always having a complementary conversation that is imbued with care in the name of the journey of healing through the process.
I'm going to add in, Sade, I love that you talk about care and using that word. I think for me, my strategy, especially this past year, has really focused on what I need to do with the self-care so I can continue as an artist. I'm an actor, solo artist, a theater and filmmaker and activist. But if I'm not focused on self-care and healing for myself, I can't do the work I need to do. And that's sometimes acknowledging that this work is very hard. And acknowledging that, people are saying, Diana, you're so positive. You're just a positive person. I am, but that's not all I am. People say, well, don't be angry, but there are things in the world that make me angry. It makes me angry that my 10-year-old nephew is sometimes afraid to play outside. Well, he gave a speech last summer that sometimes he's afraid to play outside. That makes me angry, but that's the world we live in. So I think it's, as activists, as artists, to acknowledge where our self-care is and what we need to do, and to acknowledge that sometimes it's hard and sometimes we maybe need to step away to do our self-care so we can continue and acknowledge, yeah, I get angry. That's not all I get. And I don't think being angry means I'm not positive. I think you can have two totally opposite emotions at the same time, and one doesn't have to cancel out the other, because the complexity of being a human being and the complexity of dismantling what we're dismantling and honoring that, but acknowledging that it's also difficult. And I don't think those two cancel each other out.
Can I just quickly get in there and talk about the complexity that Diana's talking about? Because you said it so beautifully, Diana. And I think also in this conversation where we're talking about self-care and healing and all of that is a part of the activism. Like the self-care, I think, and women know this better than anyone, is that the intersectionality is the wholeness of us. It is not the parts of us, right? And that women approach and self-identified women approach everything from the roundness of it all, so that if we are activists, then we have a self-care practice, right? That and that is inextricably linked from our activism, that women know better than anyone that binaries are not realistic ways in which we exist in the world. We are not monoliths. The binary is for machines, not for people. And that roundness of our feminism, of our womanism, is a part, pleasure is a part of our activism. Self-care is a part of our activism. And when we hold them separate, it sets us up for a kind of patriarchal this versus that, high versus low value conversation. And what we know as women is that it's all a part of the story of who and how we are, and most importantly, how we survive and project ourselves into a space of thrivability. So if we find ourselves existing in Black and white, in the yes or the no, as opposed to what Sahar said, the yes and the no, we are doing a disservice to our own process, practice, and ultimately to how we're modeling liberation for ourselves and each other.
I just wanted to say I really love that. And I love what both of you have just offered for us. And I wanted to give a shout out to the NAP ministry. I think the NAP ministry has really made me think very critically about how we talk about not self-care as a capitalist practice, but self-care as resisting capitalism, right? And resisting grind culture and resisting this demand on our bodies to constantly produce and to not rest, right? And to grind ourselves until our bodies just collapse, and I think that kind of discourse and conversation for me has really made me think about the women in my life and how they weren't offered that conversation, right? And how they really did work themselves to death. So I think that, I just want to affirm what both of you have said about healing and about care. And, affirming that anger could be a hopeful practice, right? Anger can be a very positive, productive practice, productive in a way that, moves people to want to do things. Like if we think of the anger of 2020, right? The anger of last summer and people taking to the streets. And I think for those moments, like when any of us join those protests, whether online or offline, for me, I felt a lot of hope. And I think I saw a lot of people feel a lot of hope because they felt like their anger was moving towards a liberatory practice.
I just want to quickly add real quick about intersectionality and my process of I identify my disability as part of my identity, and that really grows because so much time I was taught to overcome my disability. I grew up, you need to overcome this, and then I got to the point where I'm like, well, I'm not going to overcome being a woman. I don't have to overcome being Black. Why do I have to overcome this identity, which for me, how it impacts my speech and the way I walk. I walk with a slight limp. Why do I need to overcome that as something negative when I can embrace it as allowing me to represent an image of truly the largest, most intersection minority that we have? And so I just appreciate you saying that, because part of my journey has been embracing all my intersectionalities, not parceling them out as this, and this.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Diana. I think we all identify with that because in a way there's like this self-loathing that we have inherited from these, horribly violent cultures, and we perpetuate it sometimes. So to liberate ourselves from that is also very empowering. So I guess, it's really interesting for me to think about the fact that you presented womanhood or what we're presenting as womanhood today as a combination, right, of fragility and sort of force, and obviously embracing the wholeness and the humanity and the vulnerability of us and the fluidity of all these worlds that we come in and out of, so that we're obviously not robots, even though the culture we live in and the surveillance culture also turns us into, a collection of data and productive machines and so on, that really are leading to nothing but our own destruction, right? And everybody else's destruction. So it doesn't really feel like the cycle is productive in any way at all. So to reverse that, then that's where comes in archiving, storytelling, narratives, creating art, poetry, as a reversal of violence, creating poetry out of chaos. So I really want to talk about the practices that each one of you have built, and you have such an impressive body of work, each and every one of you. So I'd love to talk about how your practices are connected to this idea of archiving, telling stories that basically reverse the erasure of our identities and our peoples.
Should I jump in? I just like spill out what's inside of me. I always like to think about the Indian writer Arundhati Roy. She says that there's no such thing as the voiceless. There's just only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard. And I think about that a lot because, like in our own communities and our own families, like whenever people outside of our communities are like, we want to give a voice to the voiceless, people approach us like, we'd love to give a platform to the voiceless of your community. Like for me, I'm always like, well, I've always heard them. I've been surrounded by their voices. Like I care, like they talk to me all the time. They're constantly telling me their stories. And like, I think about, the women in my community, like what fabulous storytellers they are and what fabulous performers they are in like the spaces, right? The spaces that they occupy, the spaces that they are, they're the queens of, and I've heard their voices, growing up. And so I think, my current practice of writing, I like during Ramadan for the last few years, I've been writing every single day. And I've made that my practice. And then I take a break. I need to relax and rest. But when I go back to my past writing, I can hear the voices, right? Like I hear the voices I'm writing as I'm experiencing them. And I'm not thinking about a white gaze, or I'm not thinking about an institution. I'm not thinking about my audience. I'm thinking about telling the stories of my community in the way that I hear them and in the way that I understand them. And I find that practice of writing to be really liberatory. So I just offer that.
I would say that the world exists through our storytelling. So if we're not telling our stories, we can't live in that imagined world. National Black Theater was created by a Black woman for that very, responsive to that very thing, that we have to imagine our wholeness because no one else is going to do it for us. And that the artist's sacred oath is to digest and reflect back the authenticness of their own experience, which gives people permission to see themselves in ways that they hadn't before. And that it is a part of the artist's, what the artist is compelled through their own mediums to do is to articulate the world in their mediums unapologetically the way that they experience it, which, to Sahar's point, is the only way we move in a direction that allows us to all exist, right? Like things didn't exist before we could speak them into existence, right? A way for all of us to kind of to orientate ourselves. And so I think in terms of archiving, what's so incredible about this last year is this kind of this pivot, and I know everyone's tired of the word pivot, I am too, to like these digital platforms, to be able to have this conversation live in Florida, in LA, in New York, and invite the world into conversations with our storytelling. I mean, we like being able to be digital and allow for our accessibility needs to be met in the moment in a heartbeat has changed, radically changed the way we gather, has radically changed what we think our community is, our audience. We're meeting people literally in their home and creating an archive, right? Because this conversation in the past would have existed in a space where the privileged, like so much privilege would have to happen in order to hear what we're saying, right? You would have to be in New York. You would have to have gotten a ticket and been on the list and one of the, 50 people who could have reached, who could fit in a room. Now we're saying like our communities, we can find each other where we are at and archive it because so that we truly are living into and leaning into through our art what movement building is. It's not a moment. I wasn't inspired in that moment, but as artists, can be a part of a movement and refer back and check back in and create an archive intentionally and unintentionally so that the next generation, the next writer, the next painter, the next musician, the next artist, the next storyteller can build on, and build from all of the places that we leave off when the Zoom goes away. And so I think that, it's critical to acknowledge the pain of the last year, but also the innovation that through being these startups in so many ways, we can reinvent as artists, as storytellers, the way forward differently, more accessibly. And I think that that's exciting. So anyway, I'm being long-winded and I apologize, but at National Black Theater, a part of our ritual is the storytelling, archiving the storytelling so that liberation feels like a train that is constantly moving, that we each get to participate in from the standpoint of not only our own art form, but what came before us.
To summarize my art practice, whether I'm acting, whether I'm doing a solo show, whether I'm directing theater, film, whatever, is to make sure disability is not erased from the story and to normalize the disability experience. And by that I mean the disability experience is the human experience. We are the largest, most intersectional minority, but even in the arts, film and plays, we're sometimes erased when non-disabled artists portray our stories and tell our stories. And so making sure our authentic representation is a part of the art and that we are a part of just, Ali Spoker won a Tony for Oklahoma a few years ago because she's a very talented artist, and that was an example of reimagining art to be more inclusive. So my artistic practice, whether I'm teaching, I teach at a place called Performing Arts Studio West, whether I'm teaching or running a workshop or acting, it's just to make sure that the disability is not erased and authentic disability is not erased from the images we see, but yet the honesty of the history of our oppression is also there too. That story, for 100 years, my story was, I take a picture of me holding a boat sun upside down because I realized had I been 100 years ago as an activist, I may not have been accepted. I would have been, if I were me, probably my right to vote, I probably would not have been included in that. I probably, that's so complex it's really important for me to celebrate the stories, but also be honest and also create spaces when I direct or produce for other people to tell their stories. You know, I think it's important when you're building a table. I mean, you break down the barriers, you open the door, and then you make sure other people can come to that door. So everyone, the younger, you know, I'm not gonna play hide and coolers anymore, which, you know, but I want to create spaces for the next generations of disabled artists to come and celebrate who they are and tell their stories, and that again, the recognition, this is our human collective story. There were so many images and so many stories that we don't know about. And that's the exciting thing about being an artist, is I can learn about Sahar, I can learn about your stories, and also make sure that disability is a part of the other oppressed communities that whether women are, that I'm just as passionate about telling stories from the African American community because I'm African American. And I'm on the tell you what, I would love to do a show where I got to bring that image. But again, my main thing is to make sure disability is never race, nothing without us. That's our motto. Nothing without us. And that's my passion as an artist.
Thank you so much. Very, very inspiring. So maybe to wrap up today, I have a question for each of you. I'd like to have one strategy from each to keep gatekeepers accountable, including ourselves. I'm gatekeeping, you know, I'm conducting this conversation. Like the person who opened the Zoom is a gatekeeper. You know, we're all gatekeepers. So how do we keep ourselves and each other accountable?
I would say, it's a great question. And I think that, Shirine, so many of your questions actually house the answers, which is why you're such a G. But I would say that accountability is a part of the process, because there is no justice, there is no liberation without accountability. And oftentimes accountability actually gets left out of the equation, which is why I think in so many movements we fall short. I would say that, you know, a part of gatekeeping, there's a lot of assumptions, and there's a lot of the first question around, or a second question around power. And so, and this is going to maybe sound wild, but Lord knows I am crazy, but
we love wild.
is that I really lean into my greatest superpower in the face of gatekeepers is my vulnerability, because in our vulnerability is honesty, and in our vulnerability there is a taking responsibility for our own, being accountable to our own feelings, to our own actions. And so the way that I meet gatekeepers is in a space of vulnerability as my superpower, to speak truth into the room, not to lean into kind of the traditional power structures that allow, right? So in the same way, right, in this moment where you're brilliantly moderating us, but we're interrupting, right? We're being honest around and in the moment and in our vulnerability by saying, you know what? Let's break down that system because I have something that wants to build on this, and that may not be how the gatekeeper, not that that's you, but that the gatekeeper wants things to be conducted. But we know that when we show up fully in accountability and through our vulnerability, we can start having human conversations. And I think that's the thing about gatekeeping. It is devoid of humanity by nature of it being a gatekeeper, right? Like we just take the humanity out of it. So anywhere where we can infuse humanity, vulnerability into the process, I think it keeps ourselves accountable. And it also starts to dismantle this notion of gatekeeping being a space of power. When what it does is it continues to strip us of the complexity of our intersectionality and humanness.
I also think gatekeepers need to be willing to listen. I mean, that's the thing. What I've loved about the conversation is we've listened. I've heard stories, but if you're not committed to listening and really absorbing and taking in, so Sade says I'm vulnerable, but if I don't listen to that, how am I going to be impacted by what she says to take a different action? Or to know what action I need to take. If I'm a gatekeeper, if I'm not listening, I'm not gonna hear a story. I'm listening even though it might make me uncomfortable, so I can say, oh, okay, because that's how you change. 10 years ago, I wasn't doing the land acknowledgement. I mean, I wasn't. I do it now because I heard one and went, oh, that's important. Let me always add that now. Maybe we weren't doing audio descriptions 10 years ago, or more and more conferences are doing them now because we listened to and that is the importance of that inclusion. So you need to be willing to listen, and then based on what you hear, take a positive action forward.
I really love what Suhailee and Avery shared in the chat about gate opening and opening doors for people. And I'm really glad, Shirine, that you asked us to think about ourselves as gatekeepers. And as Sade and Diana were talking, I was like, when am I a gatekeeper? I was like really thinking about that. And I was thinking about my position as a teacher and when I'm in the classroom. And, we were just talking about how we develop our artistic practices. And in the classroom, we inherit certain kinds of oppressive methods of teaching, as well as educating and even editing, right? When we edit our students' papers and stories. And so I think in that way, I have to constantly critically engage myself in thinking about, like, how do I help this human being unleash their voice rather than cage it, right, into like a particular kind of reify a particular kind of oppressive structure that we were talking about in the very beginning. And then as far as for those of us when we are encountering gatekeepers, and I think I've encountered many without even knowing it, I think it's really important to know our worth, right? Because there's a reason why somebody is holding that gate and keeping us out. And one of those reasons is because we have so much value if we enter into the other side. And I think it's really important to know our worth so that if we are facing rejection, that rejection, we're not taking it as something that is a commentary on us, but that it is very possible and very plausible that it is a commentary on the power that we have should we enter into the other side. So for any of us who is listening in and encounters very disappointing moments with gatekeepers, just remember you have a lot of power, and that's why they're keeping you out.
Can I just get in there, because that's so inspiring, Sahar? Just to build on what Sahar said and Diana said, our value is also a part of our perspective, and that gatekeeping in and of itself kind of says that there's a linear way forward. So the other thing that I just want to add to the conversation is sometimes we need an alternate route. The gate may not be the way in, right? Every window can be a door. Why do we have to go to the gate? And so as women, we are constantly reinventing the way we move forward. It is not linear, right? And so I would just offer folks too, if there is a gatekeeper in your way, find the window and make the door, right? And we have an obligation to do that. And that when that window turns into a door, we hold it open for us all to walk through. And so, yeah, I wanted to just add that in, that, there's so many ways that we move, and it doesn't have to look the way we've seen it before. We can always reinvent a new way, an alternative way forward.
Thank you so much. So much to think about. We do have a question from the audience. So the person asks, what do you see as the role of men, I would say cis men, in supporting this change? There are many cis men who would like to know, but are not sure how.
I think number one is to ask and listen. I mean, that's the thing. Like, if you want to do something, ask the group that you're a part of to be. I think being an ally is asking and listening, saying, hey, what do you need? How can I help? And and not assume. Don't assume, but ask first. And then, once you hear, you can take action, but without asking, you're not going to know. So ask first and then listen.
I would say that is exactly right from my perspective, and that listening, especially like cis, not to make an assumption, but cis men also come through the world with a very particular lens. So I am going to use a sporting analogy, that listening is a active practice. You need to actively listen, and hearing is different than listening, right? So this is not like I hear you, which is a very surface practice by which you're quiet in order to speak, right? We're actively leaning into listening and asking questions. Be curious. If where men can be useful is in actively asking the question, listening, and being curious. Don't assume, but continue to ask questions for the purpose of understanding, and never to get in front of something, but to stand with us, right? That is the other thing. It's about standing with each other. It's about solidarity. It is about mutuality. And then the other thing goes back to our first question, which is also to take stock in yourself of all of the places that you as men need to be decolonized, that the process of which you can be an ally starts with your own internal work of dismantling the systems that exist within yourself, so that you can actively listen and ask questions from a space of curiosity.
And I would just say that if you're a gatekeeper, open the door. And if you have the mic, pass it on. And if you are actively listening and actively being asked for things, then do it.
Thank you so much. That's a very generous answer, I think. And, I think we'll all have a lot to think about in this weekend and the coming months as we continue to witness movements of resistance here and in the world. So thank you for this inspiration of solidarity and care. And thank you, the Met and the Park Avenue Armory, for having us. And I look forward to seeing you all in person very, very soon. Now we have Suhailee joining us.
Hello, thank you. My name is Suhailee Bautista, Carolina. I am a Black woman with curly hair. I'm wearing a Black dress with roses on it, red lipstick, and I have a plant behind me. It's such a wonderful honored to be with you all. Thank you to our brilliant and generous panelists, to my co-moderator, or to our co-presenter, Avery, to our moderator, to our audience for joining us today for the 100 Years, 100 Women Conversation series hosted by Park Avenue Armory and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. All of the panels will be archived in the 100 Years, 100 Women website, which is at 100years100women.net. And we encourage you to visit our website and learn more about 100 Years, 100 Women Project, the commissioned artists and their work, and resources and related programming currently offered by our partner institutions. We will end with Our Sisters, Daughters, and Mothers, a Southeastern Woodlands contemporary women's honor song created and recorded by Martha Redbone. Thank you.
Whoa, where, hey, where, hey, where, hey, whoa, where, hey, ya, hey, yo. Whoa, where, hey, where, hey, where, hey, whoa, where, hey, ya, hey, yo. Whoa, where, hey, whoa, where, hey, where, hey, where, hey, ya, hey, yo. Whoa, where, hey, where, ya, ya, ho, where, hey, ya, hey, yo. Honor our daughters, honor our sisters, honor our mothers, we are yo. Honor our daughters, honor our sisters, honor our mothers, we are yo. Whoa, we are here, whoa, we are here, we are here, we are here, yeah, hey, yo. Whoa, we are here, we, yeah, yeah, whoa, we are here, yeah, hey, yo. We are.
Yay, that was so amazing.
That was amazing.
Beautiful.
Hey. I got emojis of lipstick.